God. Thanks for joining us today on a 10-minute Bible study. Today we're talking about this. My future seems doomed. I don't know about you, but I've had those times in my life when it certainly seems that way. Thanks for joining us. So today we continue in the series on contentment and just how can we find contentment in this life. Seems like life throws so many issues and struggles at us. And today that is what we're talking about, my future. And it just seems doomed. And we're going to be looking at Psalm 88 and Psalm 89 and wonder how in the world could these two Psalms be back to back, but they are. You can go look for yourself. So let me ask you a question. How many of you have had the experience of getting new show recommendations to you by a friend, but the first few episodes just like bored you to tears, and you're like, am I missing something here? Am I dumb? What's going on here? But you're a few shows in, and you're going, does this get any better, right? Or maybe you wonder how the storyline of that show could possibly end well. If you're like me, I hate going to a movie, paying good money, only to find out that the star gets killed in the end. Kills me. Well, there are a number of Psalms in the Bible that actually end bad. And today, Psalm 88 is one of those that we're going to be looking at and wondering how in the world does this turn out in a positive way. Just a little bit about Psalm 88, and I want you to go read that. Please go read that. Psalm 88 and then Psalm 89. He starts off Psalm 88 really with a statement of faith and saying, Lord, you are God who saves me day and night. It's like I cry out to you. That's just a statement of faith. It's a good statement of faith. But then all throughout the Psalms, he's like, I'm overwhelmed with troubles and my life draws near to death. You have put me, God, in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. It's like I call out to you, Lord, every day. I spread out my hands to you. Why, Lord, do you reject me? Why, God, do you hide your face from me? He's like, your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me. And we get to the end of Psalm 88 and we're like, wow, that's it? That's the last verse? Like the last verse is, you have taken me, friend and neighbor, darkness is my closest friend. That's it. And I'm thinking, I read Psalm 88 and I'm going, something's missing there. Surely there's going to be a verse that goes, but then God. So how can one psalm chosen to be in God's holy, perfect word end like that? Read it. It's amazing. Because sometimes our lives feel just like Psalm 88. Just like Psalm 88. Now, we don't know the specific condition that the psalmist was in. We can obviously tell from Psalm 88 that there was personal betrayal. And all of us knows what that is like, to have a spouse turn her back on you, or you've been torpedoed at work, or a group of people just ganged up against you and just gossiped or whatever it may have been. We know he was in chronic pain from verse 15. He says, from my youth I have suffered. Now for me, most of the huge pains in my life, I could see the end coming, but for this psalmist, apparently not. But he says, I'm in the darkest depths in verse 6, being in total darkness. Ernest Shackleton, who was part of a doomed mission to cross the South Pole, that group got lost for nearly a year. Sub-zero temperatures, hardly any food, and he said the hardest was the darkest. You see, at the South Pole where they were at, the sun goes down in mid-May and doesn't come up until August. And that's what this psalmist was feeling, this darkness that just covered him. And then verse 8, I'm confined and I cannot escape. And that's how the psalmist feels. He's like, I don't know where to start. And then there's the loneliness that comes in on that too, this intense, sustained pain. And it seems, if anything, like God is against him. And he keeps saying, Lord, you did this and this. And verse 15 summarizes the psalmist's feelings. He's like, I'm just in despair. And this guy, the psalmist, he's just asked questions. And, is my life going to get any better? My life just seems doomed. And then we come to Psalm 89. And it starts out like this: I will sing in the steadfast love of the Lord forever. With my mouth I will make known your faithfulness to all generations. And it's just packed full of praise. Now I'm like, how are these two psalms placed side by side? Did somebody in the editing room of the Bible say, oh, let's just put these two together? It just seems so bipolar to me. But the book of Psalms is written in part to present you and I with the enigma of life. And because we go through different chapters in our lives sometimes, and sometimes our lives are like Psalm 88, and sometimes they're like Psalm 89. Let me give you a few things that Psalm 89 does assure us of. Number one is this: God's steadfast love rules over everything in your life. Psalm 89, that's 10 and 12. He rules the raging sea. He controls everything about those who would want to come against us. He stands guard. You see in that north and south, and nothing outside of God's control is going to come against us. So God's steadfast love rules over everything in your life. He also, number two, God's steadfast love is not always immediately apparent to us. That's chapter 89, verse 46. You see, the psalmist in Psalm 88 can't see any evidence of God's steadfast love. Even in Psalm 89, he says, "O Lord, how long will this go on? Will you hide yourself forever?" And we have a tendency sometimes, I think, to judge God's love for us by the situation that we're presently in. If things are good, we must be walking in God's favor. And sometimes we're willing to put up with pain if we can see this present clear evidence of how God's making it work out for the good in our lives. But the truth is, we can't always see it, can we? And sometimes we may never see it in this life. So number three, God's steadfast love shapes the glorious conclusion of his plan. In Psalm 88, prayed long enough, folks, listen, eventually will turn to praise. It may not be until eternity, but eventually it will turn to praise. You see, there's coming a time when Apostle Paul says, when the pain of this earth will seem strangely insignificant in light of the glory God brought about in us through the pain. So think about that. Maybe different situations in your life that taught you specific things. You think, well, my generation, we can see the mountaintop, but we can't see the mountain. We know there are going to be those times that we have to go through those mountainous times. But life doesn't come that way, because we are a generation of Google now, answers now, text now, TV now. But some things in life don't work that way, right? We know that. Maturity is one of those things that doesn't work instantaneously. You see, it's a lifelong process. Maturity is not instant. Number four, we behold God's steadfast love for us in the rejection of his anointed one. You can see this all throughout Psalm 89. You can read several of those verses there, beginning in verse 38, and you go, what in the world is he talking about? In verse 38, you've rejected him. And verse 40, you've breached his walls. We're talking about his heart that was speared on the cross, and blood and water flowed. In verse 41, and all passed by him, plundered, and talking about how the soldiers divided up his garments. And then verse 45, that he was covered with shame. They spit on him. They defiled his crown in the dust, and they put a crown of thorns on him that said, "Hail, King of the Jews." But why? Well, surely he has borne our griefs and our sorrows, yet we esteemed him smitten by God and afflicted, but he was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. And I think we can summarize the gospel with these four words, and that's this: Jesus in my place. You see, Jesus was rejected in our place so that we would never have to be. Number five, real quick, in the midst of pain, we experience God's steadfast love in his steadfast presence with us. He's always with us. His presence is always with us. Always. Christ in us, Paul talked about how Christ was in us. He's like, I'm with you, and nothing can happen to you that will not turn out miraculous with me as your God. Because this is not a distant God that we serve. So when I cannot grasp his plan, I need to simply cling to his presence. And then 6, in the midst of pain, we are right to pray for the inbreaking of God's steadfast love. Call out to God. You see, I believe in the goodness of God, so I will yearn for it and I will pray for it in my life, in your life, an inbreaking of whatever's going on in our church's life, whatever it may be. I'm going to be praying for. So what do you do when you feel like things are not going to get any better? Well, I'll tell you what. A couple of things, and we're done. Number 1, I would say pray Psalm 88 to God. It's okay. It's okay to pray. Just don't let it lead into some kind of sin. But be honest with God. Write a lament. Tell him how you feel. And then not only pray a Psalm 88, but preach Psalm 89 to yourself. And 3 statements I'll leave you with today, and that is this. I choose not to fear God because God is with me. I choose not to doubt. God is in control. I choose not to despair. God is awesome. God is awesome.